In today's episode of Star Trek Rips Off 40K, we have the Golden Throne with the child barbecue.
I can hear something good, smell something sizzling. Oh, yes, we do have a little bit of child sacrifice and a good old Star Trek moral conundrum.
Would you even go so far as to say that this episode was well done? Shows picture of burnt child.
You could if you want. There's actually this episode's actually a bit visceral, a bit dark. In today's episode, because we do actually see a little fried corpse.
We're 40-second ins, and already I can feel the demonetization creeping up on me, but oh well, such is life occasionally.
Hey, this is Paramount's fault. We didn't do this. They wrote the script here.
That's true. I have not sacrificed a single child in my entire life, but Paramount has.
And apparently many more will be sacrificed in the future after today.
So, the point of this episode here is, and again, they have this problem with making their plot points too goddamn obvious, and in part, I do believe this is intentional. Firstly, because they want you to experience that, oh, I figured it out feeling of pride, like you're a smarty pants, you know? And because they're retreading a lot of old ground, because they are specifically proposing to the old fans. So they're thinking like, okay, what makes for good Trek? Well, we'll just do more Trek, and it's understandable. It works, to be honest.
It's a step in the right direction, we'll say that much.
But there is more that can be done here. So, the Enterprise gets a distress signal. There's a little boat, and is being captured by space pirates, who are all kinds of means to it, and they act with unvarnished, immediate aggression against the Enterprise, just shooting at it for no good apparent reason, but do absolutely no damage whatsoever. And immediately, you're getting very suspicious, because this show, it's raining red herrings in every goddamn episode, it feels like, at some points.
Yes, especially when the Enterprise shows up and there's already a conflict, there's a helpless shuttle that's being captured, and the ship that's capturing it fires on the Enterprise. You're like, is the helpless shuttle really helpless? Are they the good guys? Who's the good guys here, you know? Is there any?
Yeah, It's getting a bit too predictable. And then they introduce us to a small child who is the supreme one and is very important to their entire civilization, and everyone lives for him. Like, okay, right, he's getting tossed into the volcano.
Goodbye, kid. Whee!
And, of course, that's exactly it. And we've figured this out within the first 5 minutes of the episode beginning, and it's just like, okay, bit predictable. Because, of course, they need to sacrifice their child. They've got this wonderful utopian society, incredible technology, they've eradicated disease, they've got floating cities in the sky, etc. And everything of this is bound upon a little bit of child barbecue every year or so.
Yep, sacrifice in order to maintain paradise.
Yes.
Which is a trope we've seen before.
Yes. And the show doesn't really take it any further than that, and that's the disappointing part. So, okay, right, you're revisiting the old bangers, fair enough, and this is a simple yet effective story, because as humans, we look at children and go, oh, that's adorable. Interestingly, we have more sympathy with animals' babies than our own, but minor details.
God, we're like pandas. We're gonna go extinct.
Yep. But again, and then you're like, but is the sacrifice of a single child worth it? I mean, this is a paradise civilization. Surely it's worth it. You know, the issue is the moral conundrum is too simplistic. That's the problem, because we've seen it before. And in reality, this is not a difficult problem. If the child isn't sacrificed, the entire planet will fall into the lava, the entire civilization will be eradicated over goddamn night, it seems is. At which point, the question is, one child or God only knows how many billions of people? You kill the child.
Yep. The entire civilization, for all intents and purposes, based on what we know, is going to be eradicated should the child not be sacrificed.
Yes. And so you kill the child. And it's just like, okay, well, that's rather simple. And anyone's just like, you shouldn't kill a child. Okay, well, you're a genocidal murderer now. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's a really kind of just sort of one-sided argument when the way they propose it. But they don't really delve too much into it because this society has accepted this and has advanced enough to become a spacefaring civilization. Because there is a sister colony, which we also predict rather quickly in this show, because it does follow the tropes a little bit too much here, where there's a other colony of people just like these people that have diverged based on that moral conundrum that is in today's episode. They couldn't stand the sacrifice, so they moved, but they moved to a planet, the only nearby planet that could sustain them, which was an L-class planet, which all we know is it's not a very good quality planet. It's pretty shit.
Yes. And they never show this planet, which is both a good idea because it would make it even more obvious. Like the moment you arrive there and there's a bunch of hard-scrabble farmers living rough and tough but honest lives, you'd go like, oh, these are the good guys. But at the same time, I think that they should explore this moral conundrum a little bit more. Instead of simply going, okay, the choice is kill child or kill civilization, you should add on a different layer on top of this. Alright, fair enough. Killing the child is a moral bad. We'll all agree upon that. But maintaining the civilization is a moral good, so it kind of weighs out. However, what if you add in the sister colony? This supposedly awful colony that we don't see, which is just complete shit. Like, let's assume it's garbage. There's probably starving children, you know, they're cold, they're miserable, and their parents are bringing their children up to be cold, starving, and miserable for no other reason than because of their own personal fifis and moral convictions. Is that not just as much a crime to the children as the sacrifice of one child?
Yep, because the entirety of their lives are cut short because of the poor quality of life they must endure, which would actually make it so much, like, more interesting as a concept to explore, because you'd be juggling two awful things, and which is really right? Are either right, or is one worse than the other?
Yeah, and they could have done this without giving away too much of the plot point, like, maybe you could have Dr. Mabunga teleport down because there's a medical emergency, and he goes like, these people are living really shitty lives, Captain. And Pike goes like, yeah, I see, that one has boils on his butt, ew. Something like that.
I mean, it's not a bad idea. I think I've seen... see, you like the doctor going down and doing that, and then having the other characters on the ship go to the other planet, because it would create an interesting moral dilemma within the crew when they have their conferences.
Yeah, and there was time for this. They could have spent 10-15 minutes on this, maybe tops, and I think they could have squeezed it in, because they haul out the reveal of the child being sacrificed to the Golden Throne for a very long time. Like, that only pops up in the last, like, 5 minutes, and we're all expecting it. We're just like, yes, throw the child in the volcano already, and finally they do.
Yep. And it's one of those things that I just wish the show would be a bit more bold with. Taking the time to explore these concepts, but also to not necessarily just retread the same old ground that we've been before. Instead, take the episodes in the past and then maybe go a step further to explore it even deeper. Even if that means doing a two-parter or something, that could be interesting or worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Like, this is not a bad idea. Like, the trope in and of itself, the moral conundrum is simplistic, but it is nevertheless effective. Anything that has to do with child sacrifice is good at tugging on the heartstrings, for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that instead of it kind of feels a little bit like the bare minimum. Like the show is, okay, I'm gonna do a Star Trek episode, and then it does a Star Trek episode, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, that was kind of what I was asking for, but now I'm greedy and I would like you to do a bit more.
Yes, I very much agree with that sentiment, because this show is doing more for Star Trek than we've seen in probably basically over a decade now at this point, which honestly is a step in the right direction. But I think a step isn't enough. I think, and I hope that they do this in the next season, because I think they're going to play it safe with the first season, to be honest, because they're trying to entice the old fans to come back, like, all right, we learned our lesson. You know, it took us, what was it, 3 movies and 2 very bad shows, and technically we want to throw Enterprise in there. I know that's a divisive one. Like, it took them a while to be like, all right, we'll give the fans what they want. You know?
Yes.
That's the thing here. Like, that's good that you finally are going to give us what we want, but go further. Now start to go further than before and start exploring more ideas here. And yeah, go ahead, retread on old grounds that previous episodes did, but maybe take it a step further, because we've seen this before in TNG in episodes similar to this, where cultures, you know, the Enterprise can't interfere with, you know, certain cultures, but, you know, maybe they could, or do some sort of thing where they could explore certain aspects of it. Now is the time to go further than you could before and work with what we have done in the past here. Yeah,
I mean, you don't necessarily need to get super complicated about this either. Just take the basic moral conundrum and expand upon it. For example, there's an SCP, which is this little website that has all kinds of monsters and horrible shit on it, and the entire thing is that Earth is actually infested with monsters and life-ending threats and horrible googity-googas, and it was a really good site until it got infested by Wookiees moderators, and now it's not a very good site anymore. But there was a very interesting story on there, and it popped up a decade plus ago, and it was extraordinarily controversial on the site back then. And back then the site was very open, very non-censorship. Anyone could post anything they wanted, and it would be rated by the community. And this was the first post that people were like, should we delete this? And the entire idea was that there is a child, a little girl, who must be abused in the most horrible ways possible, and it gets very graphic on how this child must be abused. Like, really, really dark. It takes one step beyond and then 15 past that again. And yet, even though the moral conundrum is the same one, a simplistic, you know, save the child or save the world kind of situation, because if you didn't do this, the world was grass. We would just get wiped out. It adds an extra level to it when it's also, okay, it's not just sacrificing the child, it's also abusing it. Like, where do you draw the line? At what point is the suffering of one outweighing the benefit of the many?
Mm-hmm. And what is the sacrifice for? Is it just, you know, oh, we can have, you know, fancy things? Or is it our entire civilization and, like, everything that it's built upon depends upon this sacrifice?
Yes. That's also one of the little bit of a problem with this episode, because the civilization is too advanced.
Yep. They could just leave.
Yes, that's the issue here. Like, if, again, because you already mentioned it, like, they've got spaceflight, etc. If they really were that bothered about the occasional sacrifice of a child, alright, leave. You've got spacecraft. You can leave. You can go on explorations. Like, even if you say, okay, maybe they've got limited range on their spacecraft. Okay, fair enough. They have incredibly advanced medical technology to the point that they can regenerate cells like it's nothing. You cannot tell me that these people don't have the capabilities to terraform a planet or to make hyper crops that could grow practically anywhere. I mean, they can fix almost. They've eradicated disease completely.
And even let's give them that. Let's say they couldn't even do that for whatever reason, right? They have a bargaining chip. They could bargain with any other local power. Even the Federation be like, hey, in exchange for some of our medical technology, can you seed us some, you know, colonizable worlds?
Yeah, like, go to the Federation and say, right, we want a planet, it's gotta be a nice planet, and you gotta transport us there, because we have a limited range for limited transport capacity, or whatever. And in return, we literally cure disease. Just full stop.
Your medical technology will skyrocket in exchange for this one thing. The Federation would jump on board in a heartbeat.
Yes, and that's the problem as well. Like, it undermines its own moral conundrum because it's just a bit too advanced. And there's another level of this as well that isn't explored, but you could kind of present as a possible explanation, and that is that they have they've built themselves up their own reasons and rationale for why they're doing this. Like, they've come to believe that the child is doing a noble thing, this is an honorable sacrifice, the ritual's actually kind of correct in a way, because they make a point of asking the child, like, do you do this out of your own free will? And the 10-year-old child who can barely wipe his own ass and has no concept of the world whatsoever, it's like, yes, I do this of my own free will.
Yep, because he's been indoctrinated into believing the same thing they've been indoctrinated into. Their cope, if you will.
Yes. That could have been explored more as well. Like, why aren't they leaving? Well, it's because most of them have actually convinced themselves that this is a good thing. That they've actually gone so far as to think that, yeah, the sacrifice of this child isn't a horrible act, it's actually honorable.
They've reached a point in which they've justified it so much culturally, because they're not only do they ask the child multiple times, like, do you give yourself willingly to this, because it's helping them ease their own conscience of what they're doing. They also have a huge ceremony. You know, he lives in luxury and all these things before his time comes.
Yep.
And they're like, we spend every day dedicating ourselves to the chosen one who sacrifices themselves. We venerate them, we honor them, we thank them at every opportunity we can. And it's like, yes, you might do these things, but that person's still dying in horrible, horrible agony, very slowly.
Yep. And it is still a child that has no way of making this decision with any kind of, informity whatsoever. Like, he can't understand what it means to be bound to the Golden Throne for a year.
And then fried like an egg.
Yes.
It's one of those things where they just needed to go a little bit further with it. Because it's a really cool idea. Like, the culture itself isn't evil. At least they don't view themselves that way. They're very much like, we do it, we ask them of their own free will, their own volition to do it. We do everything in our power to make this as easy as possible, because this is their coping mechanism. And it's interesting it would be more interesting if they had that challenged, or maybe that the doctor who's the father who is watching over the chosen one would challenge that idea, being like, is it okay? Because this is my son, and like, you guys, we raised him this way, and his beliefs were the same beliefs as theirs. But now when it came time for him to sacrifice his child, he didn't want to do that, because his eyes were opened to, the horrors of what they were actually doing.
Yeah, because Pike... This is one of the criticisms I do have, because the creators of the show, and I think the guy who plays Pike himself, when he was talking about the first episode with the clickbait January the 6th incidents, he said that Star Trek's role was to bring up the controversial elements, but not really to take a side. And the problem is, they failed in that, because they very clearly took a side. It's like, oh yes, look at this, and then the eugenic wars happened. Like, aha.
That's a little bit like, my nose is broken.
Yeah,
so on the nose.
It's a bit obvious right there. And in this episode, he does it again, where they present this world, and it's too, like, the counter argument is too flaccid. Piker is just like, you sacrificed a child, and she's like, can you say no child suffers in your federation? And it's like, that's not a corollary. Like, so, a child being hungry is not a corollary to burning one to a crisp because you like a fluffy pillow. This is not the same.
The Federation actively works towards bettering its colonies and trying to prevent that, and better it so that no child suffers in the future. Are you doing anything to prevent this? Like, you're not working towards a solution. In fact, the civilization is resided. They've surrendered to this fact, this sacrifice. They've accepted it. They're not trying to come up with a solution anymore. They've just accepted it now.
Yeah, like she says, oh, we tried everything. We tried to figure out a different way, but our ancestors designed this machine to eat children. Like, okie dokie. Like,
then design a new machine, make a new computer, do something.
This is a dumb reason, and it relies on your retarded ancestors having a fetish for frying kids, I guess.
Our ancestors realized that for whatever reason our planet was deteriorating, so instead of fixing it, we thought it'd be easier to fry children. It's like, okay,
honorable ancestor, why did you require the machine to fry a child? It's like, actually, you see, children burn at the correct temperature to fry marshmallows to perfection.
Our ancestors were savages. Okay.
It's a bit cruel. Are you sure that was necessary? No, but it was funny though.
I didn't like my firstborn in any ways.
Like if you had known Timothy, you would have understood.
You would have understood how crispy you could be. Oh, that they did have a dead kid in this episode, where it's like a shriveled up fried corpse.
Yes,
that looked quite horrific.
It did.
And that little kid they put in there is going to be a shriveled up fried egg too.
It was mean. It was downright mean. And they could have done more with this, because again, it's a bit too goddamn basic for the current year. Like entertainment needs to be evolving. Like, this is one of the problems we have in everything now, including gaming, in that it feels like we are just at a standstill, and the best we can hope for is a repeat of the glories of yesteryears.
And that's what kind of parodies what we've been saying with this show. It's doing old Star Trek things again. This show is taking a step in the correct direction. However, it's taken a step too short. It needs to now, hopefully, and this again, I'm just hoping they're playing it safe with this season, but hopefully in future seasons, they're going to be like, okay, now that we've kind of earned the trust of old fans back, let's start pushing forward again. Let's start exploring the old concepts of those older series and taking it a step further to explore these moral conundrums, these ideas and philosophies and questions, rather than, just retreading the exact same ground at the same level that the ones that came before did.
Mm-hmm. Strange New Worlds needs to take it one step beyond. That's what it needs.
To go boldly. Oh, indeed.
Where only Piker's little Pike has gone before.